A long, long time ago, before the internet, and before people could read, stories were told to inspire others, to pass on history and to motivate others. Everything was rooted in a story. So, to begin with, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my primate journey. For those of you who don't know, I've spent close to 2 decades rehabilitating orphaned baboons and monkeys back into the wild. To rehabilitate these orphans, I felt it was necessary to learn first and foremost from the wild troops around me. At the time, I was privileged to be living in a semi-wild area where wild troops of baboons and monkeys passed by regularly, and so I began to observe their behavior. I wanted to go as far as possible into their world, as opposed to allowing the orphans on me to learn from the human world. And these experiences gave me an unusual insight into the world of primates. After some years of living like this, my life felt right in a way I'd never felt before. I was doing what I loved and was living pretty much where I wanted to be. I was also spending more time with baboons than with humans, not out of choice but due to necessity. An inevitable side effect of rehabilitating baboons is that it separates one from the human world. When you're acting as surrogate mother to a baby baboon who's on you 24 hours a day, and you want to make sure that orphan does not become humanized, you simply can't operate in the human world the way others do. Inevitably, I became a bit out of touch with what was going on with humans. So it came as a great surprise when my work became the subject of a book and later a documentary. For reasons I couldn't quite understand at the time, people out there wanted to know more. The new world I'd entered did not only have messages about baboon life, it had much to tell us about ourselves, about the human condition. We wonder what it is that makes us human. Despite our advanced mental capacity, scientific progress, our ability to love and be compassionate, we're haunted by a history of terrible hatred, violence, greed, rape, torture, murder and war. How can humans be so cruel and apathetic? What is it that makes us so psychologically disturbed that we are capable of the most unspeakable actions? There is genocide, war, starvation, mass animal cruelty, runaway diseases, environmental devastation. There is substance abuse, depression, unhappiness, and loneliness. Some say that humans are a plague on this planet. Could that be true? When we look at how other primates act in overcrowded captive situations, where their behavior turns abnormal and their bodies are prone to new diseases, we may find some parallel with the overcrowded environment we live in. In the civilized world, we conditioned since birth by our parents, peers and teachers, the media, religion and schools on how to fit into the human world, how to be human. We are separated from nature, physically, mentally and spiritually. So the question is, how has that affected us? As time moved on, I started noticing that I changed on a deep fundamental level, and I had no words to describe this. In nature I felt strangely liberated. When I was with the baboons, there was a constant sense of bliss. Materialism didn't matter. I wasn't surrounded by people who expected me to conform to certain requirements, like having a nice car, or more degrees, or a nice house. I forgot about that way of being, and I ventured deep into the wild world. Evidence suggests that time spent in nature may be one of the most powerful ways of promoting overall healing. A number of wildlife enthusiasts have been permanently changed. This state is often referred to as wilderness rapture. In my case, I suspect it went further than that. Because I'd spent so much time with wild primates, and because we're also primates, this exacerbated the experience. The best way to describe it would be to say I'd reconnected with my inner primate, and this had changed the way I viewed life. something that has remained with me to this day. Not only had living in nature been healing, but getting in touch with my primate roots, with the animal self, had taken me deeper into a process of self-discovery. For thousands of years, humanity has searched for self-knowledge. Some look for answers in religion or spirituality. Some resort to addictions like alcohol, drugs, or the internet. Jung and Maslow and Eastern philosophers have said that the search for the true self is at the heart of all human motivation. This drive is always present, even if it is subconscious. This is a search for the soul, according to Christianity, or the godlike self that is mentioned in the Old Testament. Yoga refers to it as the Atman. Psychiatrist Carl Jung spoke of a key pair of opposites, our instincts and our psyche. The instincts are our biological roots, our body. The psyche is the totality of mental processes that include both conscious and unconscious forces. According to Jung, when we try to favor the psyche over instincts, mind over body, spirit over nature, or vice versa, we cut ourselves off from a part of who we are. In our Western world, where we are dominated by human ideas and are separated from nature, we are inevitably cut off from an important part of the self. This part of the self can be rediscovered when you live in nature for long periods of time. So we might have different interpretations of the true self, depending on our religion or spirituality, but ultimately we are perhaps searching for the same thing. In my case, I'd reconnected with the wild self, the primate self, my true essence, the animal self that is buried at birth when we learn to adapt to human society and are separated from nature. To understand more, I looked into our connection to wild primates. Carolus Linnaeus was an 18th century taxonomist who first noticed the great similarities between humans and primates. Around 1735, he had the opportunity to examine several monkeys, and he noted similarities between them and humans. He pointed out that both species basically have exactly the same anatomy. Except for speech, he found no other important differences. Thus, he initially placed humans and monkeys under the same category, which he called anthropomorpha, which means man-like. Later on, after he'd split the primates into two groups, he realized that humans are even closer to apes than monkeys. But this time he placed them in different groups because of the church. Many years later he admitted regretting this decision. Today science accepts that the chimpanzee, bonobo, gorilla, orangutan and human all belong in the same category, which is called the great apes or hominoids. The very first time I noticed how close we are to other primates was in 1998. I'd been introducing Gizmo, my first orphaned baby baboon, back into the wild, and I was accepted as surrogate mother into this troop of baboons. This brought me as close as possible to understanding what it feels like to be a mother baboon. Although I'd hoped to have help with the rehabilitation, my co-worker was unexpectedly called away for work, and I was left to find a way to release Gizmo by myself. Up until that point, the only opportunity I'd had for learning baboon language had been from my adopted baby, so my knowledge was lacking. My only choice was to follow the lead shown to me by the wild baboons, so that I could be sure that Gizmo would have a safe future with his own kind in the wild. Eventually, the day arrived when it was time to abandon Gizmo to his new family. In spite of the obstacles, the release was entirely successful, thanks to the baboons. I've often looked back and I've been amazed that he was successfully integrated into that troop simply because of the way the baboons communicated with me. If we share so many characteristics with primates, it makes sense that we share a language that is specifically primate as well. Science today recognizes that wild primates think, they reason, and they share the same emotional language as us.
Mm. Mm.